have you with us. So we have been, going over some of Sri Aurobindo's writings on Indian art, along with some of the examples that he himself mentions. So I'm going to pick up from where we left last time and go from there. So I'm just going to share my screen. That way, this is the, I hope this is visible to everyone.
Yeah, it's visible since
Yes,
it's Word file and small fonts. You please help us reading it out a little loudly.
Okay,
We can't read it.
Yeah, so it's all right. I'm going to read the selections from it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, and then I'll move on to some more pictures. Because if I increase the size a little bit, okay. Is this better?
Yeah, partially better.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think we had talked about this fact that these essays were written in response to sort of like a puerile, journalistic, ignorant attack by one named William Archer of all aspects of Indian culture, including Indian art. And Sri Aurobindo, through several examples, kind of like, was trying to put some sense into this Archer fellow as to how to begin to look at Indian art. Through simple examples, he was initially trying, but then now he makes, now he's starting to get to the core of the thing. And I think last time also I mentioned one of the things Sri Aurobindo speaks of is to understand the first principles, the essentials on which any cultural, civilizational, aesthetic is based on. So here again, he goes into a little bit deeper into it and starts talking about art criticism, how to understand, how to appreciate, how to critique art, both of our own cultural background in which we are somewhat accustomed to, and though that which is different, quite different in temperament and attitude from us. So Sri Aurobindo, as a cultural critic, comes to forefront in some of these parts that I'm going to share today. So what he says is that, all this, his empty noise and violent criticism, this is still very much on the surface, because what really matters is from where does this kind of ignorant outlook or even dislike of Indian art proceeds. And that, he says, for that you have to find the root in something deeper. For the outlook and the dislike it generates are rooted in something deeper than themselves. Now, these are the three things that he says that are important to understand. A whole cultural training, natural or acquired temperament, that is number two. And the third is fundamental attitude towards existence. So if we can understand, if you can actually go from 3, 2, and 1. So what is the culture's fundamental attitude towards existence? That is one aspect, because that gives us an understanding or of some sort of an acquired aesthetic appreciation of the art of that culture, that civilization. Second is the natural or acquired temperament. So what is the fundamental attitude that we have towards life, towards existence? And with what temperament we approach life and reality and existence, and our even, down to our day-to-day approach to life. And what kind of cultural training that one receives. These are the three things that impact how we begin to understand art. And he'll again give us examples as to understand this. Then he says, this is another important sentence, an inability to understand the motives and methods of Indian art, and a contempt of or repulsion from it was almost universal till yesterday in the mind of Europe. So again, he's going back in the history that this, as I said before, these are written in 1919, 1920, 1921, that time period. Till little while before that, there was still a huge gap between the Western mind trying to understand Indian art or Asian art. And then he says that later on, there was a little bit more opening towards the Chinese or the Japanese aesthetic. But till early 1900s, late 1890s, something like that, there was still quite a bit of dislike or inability to understand what is the primary motive, the first principles on which this art was based. And then again, he says, to the European mind, Indian art was a thing barbarous, immature, monstrous, and arrested growth from humanity's primitive savagery, and things like that. Then he goes a little bit further, where he says, because why this was happening in matters of mind, the Western mind of that time was still bound up as in a prison in the Greek and Renaissance tradition. So we are talking here early Renaissance, late Renaissance, which had a huge impact on how the Western mind understood what should be the right way to express something creative, what should be the right kind of art. The canons of Western artistic creation were held to be the sole valid criteria, and everything else was regarded as primitive and half-developed. But then he says a remarkable change has begun to sit in. As a result, and as a contributing influence towards this change, Oriental, or at any rate Chinese and Japanese art, has begun to command something like adequate recognition. This is 1920s. Indian art still was trying to, still seem as somewhat not fitting into an ordinary Western mind's understanding. There is a little bit noise. I think if they can just mute themselves.
I've made that change, ma'am. I muted it.
Okay. Now then he says, but still the change has not gone far enough. And for an effort like Mr. Havel, I think I quoted something from Mr. E.B. Havel, his earliest work, 1912, much before this work of Aurobindo, The Ideals of Indian Art, that is still very rare. So some efforts were already going on as to understand the deeper motives of Indian art, and Aurobindo acknowledges that. But there is little sign of the understanding of the very wellspring and spiritual fountain of Indian artistic creation. Still, not enough sign is there. There is therefore still a utility in fathoming the depths and causes of this divergence. Now, this is again very interesting. That is especially necessary for the Indian mind itself, for by the appreciation excited by an opposing view, it will be better able to understand itself, and especially to seize what is essential in Indian art and must be clung to in the future, and what is an incident or phase of growth and can be shed in the advance to a new creation. This is the crux, I think, at least in the way to understand what is art appreciation or art criticism, and why Sri Aurobindo is going in so much detail as to look at the Western criticism of Indian art. He speaks, elsewhere he writes about that even when there is a hostile attack on one's cultural expressions, or for example, in this case, Indian art, we should try to see what we can cull from it, what we can derive from it, what we can extract from it. And even when there is that kind of a negative, hostile attack, there is still some utility of that, because by that kind of an opposite hostile attack, we still can get what is true or essential in our own understanding of our culture. And this is here he's saying is in regard to Indian art. Because by doing that, we will be able to do two things. One, to understand what is essential and must be clung to in the future. Because art is not, or the painting traditions or sculpture traditions or any artistic expression is not going to be stuck in time. With time, new forms will be there. So we still have to grasp what is most essential in the foundation of our artistic tradition, and that we must cling to. And also recognize what is a passing phase or a phase of growth, which can be shed, which we can leave behind in advance to a new creation. Sri Aurobindo was never into the nostalgia for the past. He had his eyes always set to the future. So what future forms of artistic creation, artistic expression will be there in developed by the Indian mind, developed by the Indian artists, whichever field they are in. They need to understand what was the most essential, which they must hold on to, and whatever were the accretions, the additions, the passing interests, passing phases of growth that came in, that can be shed as we advance to new creation. So for example, in the painting tradition, in the Indian painting, I guess, progression, there probably was a time when there was, or even Raja Ravi Verma, earlier, that kind of, or the company painting school of Bengal, which was almost an imitation of the European realistic schools. Maybe that was a phase of growth, an essential, not an essential, but an important phase of growth because of the experimentation that the Indian creative mind had to do. But that may be something that can be shed in the future if there is a realization that that is no longer fitting in with what is essential in terms of how Indian painting should express. Whatever is the truth, that is, the truth is the three things that we said earlier. The fundamental view or attitude towards existence, the natural temperament or acquired temperament, what is the crux of that Indian temperament, and what kind of cultural training is there. So this is something very important. And then Sri Aurobindo says in the same paragraph, this is especially important for those who are in the creative pursuits, who are artists of any kind. And I would include even, like, for all of us who may not be qualified, who may not be, like, in conventional sense, artists of some sort, and yet there is a creative urge to express through writing, through sometimes even, I think, like, the designing, organizational creativity, designing of learning programs, designing of spaces, whether it is our home spaces, work spaces, all kinds of creative activities. This is most important for them to recognize that what is important, what is essential that we must hold on to, and what can be let go as we progress towards new forms, towards the future. This is all that I should attempt. And then he says, it's not necessary that only those who are artists or officially art critics, art scholars, that only they should be worried or concerned about this. This is another gem of a sentence, because he says everyone who has at all the Indian spirit and feeling can at least give some account of the central things which constitute for him the appeal of Indian painting, sculpture, and architecture. These three forms Sri Aurobindo focuses on in the remainder of the essays: painting, sculpture, and architecture. He actually goes in the other order: architecture, sculpture, and painting. But this is so beautiful, where he says, anyone who has at all the Indian spirit and feeling. As long as we keep this Indian spirit and feeling alive and kicking in us, regardless of whether we went to any art school or not, we can and we should be able to give some account. We should be able to express in some ways what is the central thing that appeals to me in Indian painting, sculpture, architecture, or any Indian art form for that matter. This is why he is taking the time, making the time and effort to, writing about all these things. So very quickly here, the criticism of art is a vain and dead thing when it ignores the spirit, aim, essential motive from which a type of artistic creation starts and judges by the external details only in the light of a quite different spirit, aim, and motive. So if I am trained culturally, temperamentally, attitudinally, I am more drawn to a certain view of life that looks at existence only from the outer material surface. I may not be the right person to understand the spirit, aim, essential motive from which an artist who is trying to express some deep spiritual truth or deep spiritual experience, or for example, the nirvana of Buddha. I may not have the right tools, right understanding to do valuable or informed critique of that art form. This is what AuroBindo is saying. So when it ignores the spirit, aim, essential motive. And then he says it's important to do some sort of comparative criticism, but the essential understanding must precede it if it is to have any real value. So without understanding what Renaissance art is all about, or what Greek art is all about, what Greek sculptural tradition is all about, I may not be the right person to do a good critique of that. And how will I compare it with Indian sculpture if I don't have an essential understanding of both the Greek tradition of sculpture and the Indian tradition of sculpture? So first we have to understand our own thing before we do a comparison with the other. So this, he kind of expands in this, and then he comes to the Indian, what is most, natural to the Indian, and then he will start giving us some sort of Greek, cross comparison thing. The Indian mind in its natural poise finds it almost or quite as difficult, really, that is to say spiritually, to understand the arts of Europe as the ordinary European mind to enter into the spirit of Indian painting and sculpture. No denying the fact. So then he gives an example of a feminine Indian figure and a feminine Greek figure. And he speaks about, I'm not going to go into details, just briefly, I'm touching it. So, the one way to understand them cross-culturally is to focus on that the Greek sculpture is primarily about the outer sensual beauty. It creates some sort of an outer sensuous delight. This is one way to understand it. And the Indian figure has a strong spiritual sense. But then Sri Aurobindo says, but now having entered somewhat into the heart of meaning of Greek sculpture. Remember, Sri Aurobindo had mastered what was best of the Western classical education, which included Latin and Greek literature and Latin and Greek languages, as well as the aesthetic, the poetry. So having gotten some idea into the Greek spirit, he says this is a wrong account of the matter. So what he would be, what the Greek sculpture, what the Greek feminine figure of Aphrodite will reveal is the Greek figure stresses no doubt the body, as compared to the Indian, where there is more emphasis on the spirit behind the body, but appeals through it, that is, appeals through the body to an imaginative seeing inspiration, which aims at expresses a certain divine power of beauty and gives us therefore something which is more than a merely sensuous aesthetic pleasure. So if you do not have an understanding of the Greek spirit, the ancient Hellenic spirit, you will look at it only at a surface level. Only someone like Sri-Aurobindo, who had grasped that spirit, he says even the outer beauty is not the real objective of the sculptor. Through the outer beauty, through the body, through the emphasis on the body, it's still trying to reach to some inner eye of the viewer and revealing to him or her a divine element in beauty. What is divine in beauty? And therefore, it is much more than a sensuous aesthetic pleasure. The Indian sculptor, then he says, stresses something even behind, something more remote to the surface imagination, but nearer to the soul, and subordinates it to the physical form. So to do this kind of subtle cross-cultural comparison between artistic traditions, as Sri Aurobindo said before, we have to have a very good understanding. So not to reject all that is foreign to our eye, but to try to go deeper into the intent, the essential motive, the spirit, the aim. So this is what through this example Sri Aurobindo is saying. But then he says something very interesting. Then he says where he himself fails to appreciate certain kinds of European or Western work. See, here he's still talking about the Greek, because that he understands. But the Renaissance art, which comes much later, there Sri Aurobindo says, I myself have not gone into the spirit of what was essential in the Renaissance art. And there he gives some examples of some famous paintings of one of the late Renaissance Italian Venetian painter, Tintoretto. And these examples I thought I'll show you. So I'm going to show one by one. He mentions 3 examples, not the portraits, for those give the soul, but these are the 3 examples he takes. 3 paintings of this painter: Adam and Eve, Saint George slaying the dragon, the Christ appearing to Venetian senators. I could not really find this, but I think this is the one Sri Aurobindo is referring to. And then I'll show you what he says about these 3 particular paintings. So, okay, no, I have to go to share the screen again. And after this, we'll take a little pause. Yeah. Okay, this is, so I hope this is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this is the Adam and Eve by the Venetian painter, late Renaissance, after Leonardo and what was the other one? Michelangelo. So later period of Renaissance. So this Sri Aurobindo says is one example. He cannot get into the spirit of it. And he says, why? Because to him, and I'll read his exact words from the book I have here in front of me. When I try to analyze my failure, I find at first certain conceptions which conflict with my expectation or my own way of seeing. This muscular Adam, the sensuous beauty of this Eve, do not bring home to me the mother or father of the race. See, because he has a certain idea of not just a mental idea, but as a certain inner temperament a natural or acquired temperament which comes from the fundamental philosophical attitude towards life, existence, human life, srishti, the whole, philosophy, the spiritual philosophy that is at the base of Indian culture. So to him, they do not appear as the mother and father of the human race. Let me show the other example. This, how can I just, I should have put this in a, sorry, I should have put this in a better, no, I'm still there. Yeah, here it is. This is the second painting. Sorry, this is the third. Let me go back to the second one. Yeah, this is the second one. Saint George slaying the dragon, one of the very popular Christian legends with roots in pre-Christian tradition, where again Sri Aurobindo says this does not reveal to him what? He says, just like the Adam and Eve do not bring home to me the mother or father of the race, this dragon seems to me only a surly, portentous beast in great danger of being killed, not a creative embodiment of monstrous evil. So what dragon in this legend symbolizes is the evil that is being killed by this martial saint. There is a tradition in the Christian and the pre-Christian traditions of the West of saintly figures who were also warriors. So the warrior saints, and they are the ones who try to kill what was evil in the setup. So there is the whole story behind that this princess was being, was offered as a sacrifice to this dragon, and Saint George was killing it. But the idea is that this dragon should symbolize that evil. Sri Aurobindo says, to my eye, it just looks like a beast which is about to be killed, not necessarily it does not express the spirit of that evil, all that asura, the falsehood that needs to be killed. Yes.
Double click the picture, it's small.
Okay, this is better. This is the part that Sri Aurobindo speaks of. Oh, no.
Beluji, you just double click on that image now, it will become full screen.
Yeah, I have done that. I've done it.
Achha. I think we are not able to see it.
It's not visible. I'm going to put it in the group also. I double clicked it. Now when I double click it, it becomes smaller. Is it visible now?
No, ma'am, it's not visible.
Okay,
like we can see the small captions. We can see the small pictures, miniature pictures, but not enlarged.
Okay. This is the maximum I can show.
Perfectly okay.
Huh?
It's okay.
Okay, I'll put it in the group, but let me then go quickly to the third one, because I'm still, why does it? This, I didn't think about putting it in, yeah, the third one is even smaller than this.
Now we can see, ma'am.
This again, Sri Aurobindo doesn't feel this is, he says this something very personal. He says, this Christ with his massive body and benevolent philosophic visage almost offends me, is not at any rate the Christ whom I know. This part, whom I know, is interesting because he's talking about a personal experience, personal realization of the Christ consciousness, in that sense, that what Christ consciousness represented in the evolution of humanity. in the evolution of the human race, not necessarily Christ, the Jesus, but the Christ consciousness represented. So again, because of his fundamental grounding in a certain philosophic approach to existence, to reality, and the temperament and the cultural training, it is not possible to truly appreciate what is foreign. So this kind of artistic criticism that Aurobindo speaks about is very important. And this is particularly for those who are trying to appreciate any artistic form, any artistic creation, and certainly very relevant to the artists themselves as well. Let me go back to our reading, which, yeah. So these are the three paintings that he said are not, and then he says, when I try to understand my failure, and I find at first certain conceptions which conflict with my expectation or my own way of seeing. So he's recognizing and acknowledging the subjective element of understanding or appreciating art. So, and then that way, he says, I can, he can understand that why Archer would have these kinds of things to say about Indian art. But then he says, even though I'm tempted, I'm not going to go this far to apply Archer kind of criticism and say that, the mere execution is beautiful or marvelous, but there is no imagination, nothing beyond what is on the surface. So he says, I'm still not going to go and say up to that part, because I understand that each artistic canon, each artistic tradition is based on a certain essential motive and tries to express a certain spirit. Let me just also highlight this part. I can understand that what is wanting is really the kind of imagination I personally demand. But though my acquired cultured mind explains this to me and may intellectually catch at something more, my natural being will not be satisfied. I am oppressed, not uplifted by this triumph of life and the flesh and the power and stir of life. Not that I object to these things in themselves, or to the greatest emphasis on the sensuous or even the sensual. These are elements which are not at all absent from Indian creation. If I can get something at least of the deeper thing I want behind it. So this is, the crux of the thing. I can somewhat get into the spirit, have some understandings, have some appreciation, intellectually catch at what the artist, coming from a very different orientation, is trying to express. But my true natural inner being will not be satisfied, because I'm still personally demanding a certain kind of expression based on what I understand. And then he says, it's not because I have some personal or cultural aversion to too much emphasis on the outer beauty, the sensual part of, the outer physical expression, because these have also been dealt with in Indian artistic tradition. But there has always been some emphasis of something deeper behind. So, which then he says, I'm not going to even say that, the greatest Indian painters are not going to satisfy myself. And rather, I would be turned to some barbaric Indian painting or statue, some calm, unfathomable Buddha, bronze Shiva, or 80-armed Durga slaying the Asuras. But the cause of my failure is there, that I am seeking for something which was not meant in the spirit of this art, and which I ought not to expect from its characteristic creation. So you cannot expect Renaissance art to express what was emphasized in the Greek spirit You certainly should not expect Indian sculpture of Nataraj, from the Cholas, emphasis that Chola inspired Nataraj to express what Hellenic spirit might have been. So that is the failure that is there, because when we try to see from what I know into the other artistic form, that's where the problem begins. And if I had steeped myself in this Renaissance mind as in the original Hellenic spirit, which is the Greek spirit, I could have added something to my inner experience and acquired a more Catholic and universal aesthesis. So this is Sri Aurobindo, the globalist, Sri Aurobindo, the universalist, that in order to develop a more Catholic, more universal aesthetic eye, we need to immerse in self into all kinds of aesthetic traditions. Otherwise, we will continue to have half-baked ideas about art that is different from our cultural understanding. So this aspect of Sri Aurobindo as the cultural critic, cross-cultural critic of art and culture is often not talked about or appreciated, but he really has very masterful things to say about this. So let me take a pause here and invite questions, comments, reflections, because then Aurobindo goes into a few more examples, but we need not go into. And the later part of this essay is already something that I covered in our first introduction session as well. So I'm going to stop sharing here and invite comments and questions. Okay, Juhika has also joined. Pooja, Daljit. I think Daljit ji, you are from Delhi, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, good to have you with us.
Yeah,
Okay.
my pleasure.
So anyone who would have any comments or thoughts or reflections at this point, please feel free.
May I?
Yes, please. Maybe you
So,
will briefly introduce yourself as well.
yeah,
Because...
my name is Daljit Vadhva. I'm from Delhi. I run a arts and media institute in Delhi. And to understand Shri Aurobindo's perspective on arts is very important for me. That's why I have joined this group. So my question might, like, what is my understanding after listening to you? The first thing that the artists need to be in that consciousness while creating the piece of art. Then only what expression will manifest will come there. So this is what I could gather. And the second is comment on this, I interact with a lot of artists, and with all due respect to them, I feel that artists are more, I think, in their spiritual pursuits or, in their character, they seems to be more vulnerable. Like, I'm not judging them, but this experience I had. I have encountered a lot of artist lobbies in the country, like even in a one genre, like if you will talk about photography or filmmaking, even in that you have a lobbies where the one lobby is not appreciating the other. So all this is I feel that first thing is the individual uplifting of consciousness, and spiritual pursuits. That is the most important key here, which one needs to work upon. or if you are nurturing artist, you need to give this inputs in a very practical way. That is what I feel very strong.
Yes, I quite agree with your observation, Daljit ji. And certainly with the work that you do at Sri Aurobindo Center for Arts and Communication, I think that's what it is, right?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
I mean, with the kind of people that you interact with, students as well as teachers and everybody who is, in that mass communication or commercial art genre. Probably, I think we have one or two artists in the group also, professional visual artists, Juhika and Bindu, who are also teaching art in schools and universities, and maybe there are others as well, who would also probably say something similar, that even in those fields, there is that lobbying that you mentioned, putting down of the others. But I think the crux is what you just said, that kind of exposure has to be given to art students when they are going through the training, so that they get grounded in that fundamental attitude towards life, the fundamental philosophical way of looking at what true existence is, what true life is. Then they can probably grow as artists with a much more groundedness in it. And I think it's not only true for artists, it is true for everyone. I studied economics, and I said recently in some other context, when you read Sri Aurobindo's writings on the true nature of money as a sign, as a visible sign of a universal force, that one idea changes everything that I spent time for 5 years understanding what is money and finance in my formal training in economics. So because our education does not necessarily give us that deeper cultural grounding in which we can stand and grow, which we can root ourselves in and then expand. I can be interested in Greek art or this art or that art, but I have to have a very good grounding in the foundation in which my my cultural aesthetic tradition grew up in. Without that, I cannot do it. And that's why sometimes I think we just get carried away. This is true for artists and probably other pursuits as well. We get carried away by whatever is the fad of the day. And hence lobbying starts, this versus that, that versus that. So those things, I think it has to go back to grounding our education, that cultural training that Sri Aurobindo speaks about as point number one. That cultural training is very important. How do you develop that cultural training? Through the exposure. If it comes from the family, great. If not, then it should come from our education as well. Maybe both. Maybe the communities. So all kinds of things are needed. And that's why I think Sri Aurobindo also was not just concerned only about understanding Indian art. He was also concerned about arts education, which is why he wrote those essays, National Value of Art, which is primarily for arts education.
Yes.
So if we have time, we can, at some point, talk a little bit about those essays as well. Yeah.
So my aspiration is like, after attending all these sessions, if a small group can come together and see what kind of curriculum we can develop for to teach art, that from the sure, because you read and sometimes you feel little underconfident to explain Sri Aurobindo's like this is there. So I feel if post this, if we can come together and create some good curriculum for students, like they can go through, and in a very simple way where as you said, they understand how to ground themselves before getting into this glamour side of art,
Mm.
where it like, it takes away all the spirit, all the purpose. When you get into that red race, like, this gallery, that gallery, how to become a part of the gallery, how to, such a beautiful expression art, but the whole, the things, what is happening in that is very, very from the low vital. So we how we can interrupt that, how we can shift something there is like what I aspire for.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. And Kiranji, my other co-facilitator, is not here with us today. She's traveling, but that's a very good thing we'll consider definitely, because that is something of great interest to many educational institutions. So thank you so much, Daljit ji, for this very insightful. I saw one hand earlier. I don't remember whose was it. But anybody who would like to add something or
Beluji, can I? Narendra.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I just I like that point just now, which was told by Daljit ji, that there has to be a curriculum or a course developed for understanding these basic ideas about art. Much needed. Seeing the just opposite of that which has been prevailing overall. Having said that, I was just wondering, when we talk about this, some people being put down or a lobby working, and that's also a right observation. My doubt or my question to you was, is it because there is always a element of subjectivity in a art? Means the judges with some preconditions or some sort of, either judges or the people who are in the sort of, they have got some clout or they have got some position from where they can command. So they will say, we do not like it, or we do not subscribe that this is a good singer or a good painter or his art is of some value. That is it because there is always a element of subjectivity that somebody likes, and or I mean, if there is a proper science which is known, then we can make it a bit more objective. I'm getting that now doubt how to solve this problem of subjective and objective part.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying, Narendraji, there. I mean, art, beauty, generally by nature is subjective. So some subjectivity is always going to be there. But is that subjective understanding coming from the examples that Sri Aurobindo was giving? Like, I don't know the Renaissance period, so I can't appreciate Adam and Eve this way. Or is the subjectivity coming from that lower vital, which Daljit ji was saying? Like, so for example, a prejudice, or for example, I'll just take some example, like some basic thing from a certain kind of films, for example. I've always felt that Indian filmmakers are not good at certain genres like horror, for example. They make a mockery out of that, or even too much sci-fi. They make really very weird, science fiction kind of thing. But Indian filmmakers, for the most part, have a certain expertise, have over a period of time developed a certain expertise, which is grounded in a certain Indian cultural view of telling stories that have something to do with the fight between right and wrong, the dharma, the inner dharmic sankat, the inner conflict, like that. So whether it is inspired by the thousands years old training that we just pick up through by breathing in this air of stories from Ramayana, Mahabharata, Purans, and all these, or whether it is, some sort of focused understanding as to what this is, if we stick to that, even in a very modern context, the stories are being told beautifully. But when there is too much digression, experimentation in genres that are not natural to the Indian cultural mind, they do a pretty bad job. This has been just my observation, very subjective. But when somebody, if I'm a filmmaker and if I really enjoy Hollywoodian horror films or sci-fi or things like that, and if, as a filmmaker, I try to put that into Indian cultural sensibility and do a reasonably awful job or mediocre job and hold on to that, that why is it that Indian filmmakers are only doing the old style and not experimenting, not giving me awards, not giving me recognition because I'm doing something new. That is not a subjective thing, right? That is coming from a certain mental prejudice. So that part also, I think we need to get some understanding of what, because there is a certain temperament, certain natural, like what Aurobindo says, my natural being is not satisfied. So it does not matter which religious background a certain filmmaker comes from, as long as he or she is grounded in that, that genre of storytelling, which is so vast, so long in Indian tradition, through theater, through folk art, and so many things, through Ram Leelas and Ras Leelas and whatnot, they'll do a good job with it, I think. This is just my observation. I could be wrong, of course. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. Anybody else would like to share some reflections, thoughts?
Namaste, Beluji.
Yes, namaste,
Dinesh.
namaste.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that you were mentioning about Indian movies. So, what we saw the previous year, it just occurred to me that movies that made a pan-India kind of what pan-India appreciation were movies that were based more on Indian culture, like these two movies, and there was this Elephant Whisperer, which again got Oscar. So just wanted to touch that point, and there was this Telugu movie RRR and Kantara. Basically, movies that touched Indian culture. That's what made pan-India appreciation. Got pan-India appreciation for it.
Yeah,
Could
yeah.
see that trend.
Yes. Though I personally didn't enjoy RRR, but that's a whole other discussion.
Even I have not seen that.
Because I think that also that falls into a certain trope, at least the way I intellectualized it. But the Elephant Whisperer, I totally agree. If there is anybody who has not watched this documentary, please do watch it. Very, very much in the Indian sensibility. The Elephant Whisperers. But again, getting an Oscar is not a validation. You see, the thing is, we ourselves need to understand this art form using the kind of cultural grounding that we are talking about. That is just for the outer recognition. Yeah.
And I
think
that you
yes.
mentioned even in that article, what you have read, Aurobindo, I think spoke about it, like that validation should not be the idea of. And I'm so sorry to say here, I might sound very critical. In Elephants Whispers is one of my alumni was cinematographer, writing with fire, and in both the films. So that is a pride for us. But I think even the RRR and all this is also a lot of lobbying work.
Yeah.
In award system that goes behind that. So
True.
that is also there.
Yes, very much. No, that's very.
That can't be the yardstick to judge any film, that if, because there are so many good films unrecognized, like because of they don't have money to market or to do lobby for that. So many good films are there.
Yeah, no, very much true. Yeah, so that marketing commercial aspect is a whole other
Yes.
box. I think Binduji, you were also trying to share something. I saw you unmute yourself before we. Okay, maybe not. Anybody else who had anything to share or add?
Am I audible? I've unmuted myself.
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay. So I just wanted to share the same thing which Narendra ji mentioned, that the subjectivity and objectivity of art. So this is the thing which was coming to my mind only, that it's not that we can give this knowledge to a larger group of people. What Daljit ji was saying, that lobbying and whatever gallery thing, business thing involved in this process, this subjectivity is confined to very little. I mean, is confined to a limited group of people, because everything what I feel Sri Aurobindo has said is quite lofty and is not meant for masses. I don't know if it is right to say, because a normal mind cannot comprehend things so deeply, because if everything depends uh, on the level of the consciousness you are living. And if a person is living at a ground level of consciousness and attached to material life, material success, comparison point of view, because all this thing, if art is for livelihood, then why not people will do lobbying and business thing? Because they need to earn their bread and butter out of that. It's not the period when the kings are patronizing artists, or an artist can work for even in that period they were trying to please the king. The artists who were being patronized by kingdoms and kings, they were also in the process of pleasing king. So there is just not one dimension, and the dimension we are talking here is very limited, is very subjective, and it it depends on your growth, your consciousness. A person who is in the process of evolution in the sense of in the process of growing his or her consciousness, that person, if that person is an artist, he will do his art, he will do his art subjectively, and it will be an offering to the divine, everything what you were mentioning in the earlier essays also. But if that art is just a skill, or it's just for business purpose, for livelihood, then everything will be involved in it. And the movies you have mentioned, the documentaries, it's not that, okay, the lobbying is there, but that compilation, that cinematography, that somehow it has an aesthetic appeal. But that obviously there must be some other documentaries who are much more uh, must be having more qualitative aesthetics. So I think this platform is very limited, is suitable for very limited class of people. And another thing I wanted to share, I think Daljit ji also mentioned that to add something to the curriculum of education, because that is a forced thing. So when things are forced in curriculum, every human mind, every child will somehow, he'll become open to grasp it. Because if he studies math, science, whether he is not good into logistics and all that, but still science and maths, basics, things becomes clear to the child. So I really appreciate this idea of adding this knowledge in a very, very simpler form, because uh, I think then only it will be more understandable, more comprehensible for smaller children.
Mm.
Uh, and if it starts from a younger age, this is this is the only thing which I wanted to share.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think very well said. Yeah, there are so many other aspects to art as what you said, art as a means of livelihood for people, or artistic pursuits as a way to, sustain oneself materially, physically in the world. So we can't ignore those dimensions as well. But maybe some of those dimensions are not necessarily part of this particular platform, though for an
Yes,
art
yes.
institution.
Huh,
But
yeah, this platform is specially to become a yogi, I think.
not really like that, but in the sense
In that
to
process of,
appreciate,
to at least step into that process of.
yes, to understand the spiritual basis of Indian aesthetic and artistic
Understanding,
tradition, I guess.
that's good. If you understand and if you are a bit into it, then
Yes,
only things it will match. It will match
right,
with your understanding.
right. And the other point is also very well taken, Sri Aurobindo, and I think Daljit ji also mentioned this, that, he can be difficult to understand. And, these are lofty ideas or ideals, but my personal thing is, having spent many years in the field of education, that we have totally removed ideals from
Yeah,
exposure in our educational setting. So there is a
yeah.
need for that as well. And then whoever is ready, as you said, has evolved to that point, that becomes their guide in life.
Exactly.
Whoever is still
Huh.
walking the
Yes, yes.
path, at least there is that, at least some exposure to. But
Exactly.
we will certainly take up this point about, some coming up with some sort of, or at least trying to come up with some sort of um, curricular module or something that can be introduced in certain art institutions to begin with,
At
and
least,
maybe
yes, yes.
eventually other institutions as well. So maybe as we go along, right now, I know Kiranji is also working on this, that, we are trying to get different people to present their perspective also. So I think in a day or two, we'll be sharing something in our WhatsApp group as to who would be presenting next. But yes, Juhika, you wanted to share something, please?
Yes, ma'am, but do we have time, like 2 minutes?
Yes, I think I'm okay, but if anybody wants to leave, please feel free. But I'm very interested in what you have to share, Juhika. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about joining late, ma'am, because I had another session going on parallelly. So I could just hear the end part of it. Coming to the discussion, I think being in a democratic system, I think it's okay to have different systems where one caters to something which is very commercial and one caters to something which is purely aesthetic. And I think being into this system, we should just appreciate probably each other, because both of them has their own spaces independently. I totally agree with ma'am what she said, that certain modules can be introduced in to make aesthetic understand to the young learners. Not necessary they learn uh, Aurobindo after coming to the university itself. Why can't it be schools? Um, so one of the initiative that Art First is taking, I'll just share that. So it's an organization based in Delhi. It's called Art First. So what they have done is they have collaborated with DPS, 5 different DPS of different states. So they have come up with their own curriculum and people to teach that curriculum. It is only based in art. So there are two different parallel curriculum that they have to study. One is a general education and another is art. So whatever CBCS course that DPS offers, they have to study that. At the same time, they have a book, say standard 1, standard 2, standard, 3rd, 4th, 5th, each has different curriculum. And believe me, madam, I have gone through the curriculum of 4th standard, which basically talks about Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh's painting, and also get the ability to criticize and comment over it. Just imagine a class 4th student who can you can actually understand Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh work. So I think something like this can also be introduced in Gujarat State Board. Why not? Because Delhi CBCS and ISC, which school, ma'am? It is DPS Agra, Surat, DPS Delhi, and there are more 2 different DPS in which the art first syllabus is actually going, and they have very specific teachers to train students. So, and there are another artist who train these people. DPS art first syllabus, yes. So, so I think this could be an initiative to cater school students. I think that is a perfect age to introduce philosophers in a different way. So it could be games. It could be, instead of teaching them teaching them all the philosophies, it could be designed in a game version. So today only I was actually talking to Veena ma'am. Why can't science of living and the 4 aspect and the core values be in a game format? For example, first year, they have to keep earning points by understanding and answering. So they have to play the game, okay, and answer what is the higher vital, what is the mid vital, what is the lower vital, and then again what comes into this higher vital. So it could be stage wise. So just thinking what could be an interesting way to kind of give exposure to these young brains. And I definitely agree that there has to be some beautiful design to understand this in a very, very, very basic and upbeat manner.
Yes. Juhika, I think if maybe we can assign you this homework and you can discuss it with Kiranji also, if it is possible for you to share a little bit more about this art first curriculum at some point in our study circle, that will be great. And with some examples, like, if you have, you shared 1 or 2 examples, but in a little bit more exhaustive detail, if you can, that will be great. At some
I can
point.
definitely try that, ma'am, because my friend Gopa was also involved in designing the curriculum with other artists.
Okay,
so
great.
I can,
Yeah.
sir, I'll definitely let you know where we can get this curriculum, because you have to buy this. It is not easily available, and it is exclusively for DPS. So I have to see how I can reach to these books, and if university can buy these books to understand, and maybe a similar thing can be made, or if we can tie up with Art First to introduce these in local schools. Why not? Why only DPS students can get this opportunity to learn? Why not government schools kids get it? So I think we should. मैम मैं तो बहुत छोटी हूँ, पर आप लोग like सब बड़े बड़े लोग, I think if you all kind of
we can if you know somebody who's in the art first, we'll go through them, I think. That will be the best way to go through art first and maybe invite them in. And let's see, I'll discuss it with Kiran ji also at some point and with Daljit ji here and some of you who are actually art educators. You are there. And yeah, ji, I don't know what your background is, but since you're interested, maybe. So we will have some specific core group discussion also.
I used to facilitate an integral curriculum in Mirambika.
Acha.
In Delhi, and now in Prakriti I do global perspectives, but I'm interested in integral education.
Okay.
Where art and everything else is integrated.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's see, because initially we thought this study circle will be of 10 weeks, but lately we've been thinking, given the kind of people we are, who are getting attracted to it, so we are quite open to expanding it. And I mean, this is an evolving project in the spirit of integral education, integral learning. So we don't have a fixed curriculum to begin with, except that we want this grounded in Sri Aurobindo's understanding of art and spirituality. That's all that we have, but we are open to suggestions, ideas, authors, that we will be gradually introducing. And so maybe in the next few days in our WhatsApp group, if anybody from this group is not in the WhatsApp group, please, they can let us know, and Satya will add them to the group. So we'll update there as to what's the agenda for next week, and we'll go from there. Okay, there are still few things in this chapter that I would like to take up at some point, if not next week, at some other point, but more updates will be coming in that WhatsApp group. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for a wonderful discussion. Yes, Nimesh ji, please go ahead.
Today has been one of the wonderful day. We are taking step by step discussions to a newer and wider perspectives, and I'm happy our efforts are going to bring a lot of initiatives, many more things to come in time. We always end the session with one minute prayerful silence. So
yes, we'll do that. Let me just quickly read Veda's comment. Yes, creative. Yes, we definitely have. In fact, we had invited Jayashree Ashok at one other session we did with Kiran ji, I think last year or 2 years before. Yeah, it was in 2021, I think, on the art programs in.
Yes, I remember. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, she will be also part of when we go to that next level of curriculum design. So yes, definitely. Okay, great. Yes, Meshji, as you said, we'll end with the brief moment of silence.